Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that won't put you in the poorhouse. I am Mark Stucker.
And I am Anika Madden, and welcome to episode number 13, the types of schools that should be on your kids' college list. In this week's news, we'll talk about the reasons why so many college students are transferring after their first semester in college. We're in chapter 13 of 171 answers, and we'll talk through the types of schools that your kids should have on their college list. And this week's question comes from a college counselor who asked Mark why he doesn't seem enthusiastic about Parent Plus loans.
Listeners, Anika and I were having a really good conversation afterward about how we were inspired by Marian Henderson and the group of ladies in Westchester who are starting the podcast listening group. And we were talking about we should give them some special privileges, like maybe put their photos up on our website or take some of their questions on our question and answer period. And so we are still thinking about some special perks to give to anyone who decides to do that, because as Anika said, it's a lot of work that goes into that. But one thing that I can tell you, if you do start your own listening group, be prepared for Anika to give you a nickname. So last week she came up with a nickname of the Action-Oriented Mamas for the Westchester group. So just be aware that you're probably going to get a nickname if you do start a group, but it's all good.
Dun, dun, dun.
Let's turn to college admissions hot topics in the news.
Okay, Mark, another great article this week coming from the Washington Post. And this is from a friend of yours, Mark, Mr. Brennan Bernard. He talks about why so many college students are deciding to transfer in their first semester of college. What is that about? They're saying that a third of students decide that they don't want to be where they are, Mark. And he goes through his list of reasons. And I just want to go ahead and dive into what you think about why that's happening so often.
Yeah. I have to tell you a quick story about Brennan too. When I was at Westtown, Brennan graduated from Westtown School, boarding school I worked at, and he went up to Franklin Marshall College, and he came back, and he was a college counselor, and he was a really, really good writer. And our lead college counselor, Susan Tree, used to tell me, Brennan is such a good writer because he had to write the full blown recommendations for students. And for all you listening out there, just really cultivate your writing skills, because Brennan is now one of the most prominent writers when it comes to college admissions. You'll find his articles all over, from Huffington Post, Washington Post, and lots of other places. Mm-hmm. So students work on those writing skills. It'll pay off. But to your question, Anika, yeah, the stats were pretty stunning. 37% of students transfer, more than 1 in 3, according to National Student Clearinghouse Research Center data. And do you remember the number of students that transfer a second time?
Yeah, half of that, right? They said.
Yeah, it's 45%, which is basically almost half the students transfer again. And so here's a little bit of the data for you data people. I'm a stats person, so some of you I know are stats people, some aren't. So 14.2% transfer in the first year, 36.8 transfer in the second year, which is the biggest group, 24.4 transfer in the third year, 12.6 transfer in the fourth year, 7.5 in the fifth, and 4.7 on the sixth. Hopefully not too many people will be on the 6 or 7 year plan here.
Well, I'll tell you some of the reasons, though, Mark, was pretty alarming, kind of hilarious a little bit in terms of kids. Well, basically, the first one he starts with is that kids just, everybody's in this age of I need instant gratification and I want it right now and everything has to be perfect. But what he's saying, these kids are just not, like, the tenacity and the grit is just not there with a lot of these kids. Like, they just go in and see that it's a little wobbly and they just, run for the hills.
Yeah. In fact, you hit two, in the article for our listeners, he goes over, 8 of the main reasons why people are transferring so much. And I don't know about you, Nika, but I thought he just nailed it. I thought this article was like amazing. I really did. I just thought it was amazing. And you hit on two of the reasons right there that he shared, one being the need for immediate gratification. He says in the article, he says, we live in an age of immediacy and instant gratification. If we have a question, we Google it. If we're lost, we ask Siri. And so people just wanting it right now, right? And then you hit on another one as well, which is he calls it mindset. He calls it persistence, resiliency, tenacity, grit, call it what you want. And then he says, as parents try to protect their children from failure and disappointment, students often arrive at a college without having had the opportunity to fall out of the nest and rise again. In other words, get knocked down and bounce up. Right. And with this delayed adolescence, comes an unwillingness basically to persevere. And so there's a lot of research out right now on grit and how it's correlated with life success. So I thought both of those were two of the important reasons he brought out, immediate gratification and the lack of grit.
But what about the one, Mark, about where the kids go to the schools? And this is really relevant to a lot of what we've been talking about recently, where these kids go to these schools for the reputation of of specific programs that the school has, but they do it but not really. They hadn't had the opportunity to shadow or do an internship to really understand what they're getting into. So they get into it and they're like deep in, and they're saying, "Oh, wait, this is not really what I want to do." So now here they are in this institution that's the sole reason why they went there was for that degree that they don't even want anymore. So he cites it as, them having limited options at that point.
Yeah. And one thing I kind of like about this article is kind of funny. He gave most of his reasons a nickname.
Right.
So this one he called the specialist, and he talked about the pressure kids are feeling to pick a career at such an early age. Right. And I can relate to that because a lot of times when I'm working with parents, they almost, and this is a bit of an embellishment, they almost are like hyperventilating sometimes when they meet with me. They're like, my kid doesn't know what they want to do. They don't know what they're going to major in. And I'm like, they're 16, and so he says, there's this increased pressure to pick your career well in advance. And if a kid says, I'm going to be a doctor because the school has a high medical school acceptance rate, and then they get to college and they figure out that being pre-med is not their calling, then they feel like, oh, I guess I better bounce. I better find another school. Right. And so he called that the specialist. That was another one of his reasons. That he listed. And then going
into his next nickname, the Full Monty.
Yes, I like that one. You want to comment on that one?
So this is about these kids. We talked about this too. These kids getting drawn into these amenities of the school. They've got the LSU carved out swimming pool. What do they call it? What was it? The river.
Lazy River.
So the kids are getting drawn into, the amenities of the school, and then the reality, the what do you call it? The honeymoon period is over. You're in for a few weeks, and then it's like, oh, wait, this is a lot of work. Oh, wait, I got to go to these classes. Oh, wait, the hardcore work sets in, and that pool isn't as attractive as it was.
Exactly. and he's so right. And another reason that the very first one he listed was almost kind of the same thing as the Full Monty. I called it, he didn't give this one a nickname, but I called it unrealistic expectations. So this is where he said, how many times did I hear in high school that college was going to be the best 4 years of my life? And, and then he said, so by the time kids move in, they're expecting it to be nonstop 24/7 fun. Right. And all of a sudden they get in there and I don't like this class, or I may not like my roommate, or all the different things they run into. And because their expectation was this is going to be the absolute best experience of their life, the gap between reality and expectations is such where they want to bounce.
And I say he went through quite a few, which are really interesting, but he did give some really great advice that I feel would be helpful for our parents to really hear, to convey to our kids, because it's about, first of all, make an effort to make it work. Like, find the positive in everything, everything's going to be tough. So don't go in there nitpicking around, everything that's wrong about it, and to get involved. Oh my goodness. Didn't we just talk about this last week? The engagement on the campus, getting to know your professors, because these kids, that was another thing he talked about, where, you got this high school kid that's used to these intimate relationships with their school teachers. And that's not the case anymore. So they're thrown back like, oh, wait, this is too, they're in a class of 100 where they were in a class of 25 to 32. And he's telling them to try something different, be present, give it time. And he's saying, don't give it, it's not about time. Doesn't mean a couple of days or a couple of weeks, give it a few months.
I like that point he ended on that. But before he did that, he mentioned 3 other reasons that I thought were also important. One of them was he called it being sidelined. And I totally relate to this. So this was more for athletes that are used to being like the stars in high school, and now they're going and they're riding the bench and they're waking up at 5 and they're going 2 a days and they're not playing at all. And I see this a lot too, where they're ready to transfer right away because people get caught up in the glamour of having to go D1 or go to the school with the name, but they realize pretty quickly that going to the school with the name, that honeymoon wears out real fast when you're sitting on a bench all day and you're working 4 hours a day and your friends are having fun and doing things and you can't do anything and you don't play. And so he talked about that. And he also talked about what he called College 101, which was comparing the impersonal nature of being in a huge lecture hall where you kind of feel like a number to maybe coming from a real small class size and sometimes even a small school size where everybody knew you and you had a sense of belonging. And then do you remember the one he said about the cash, Anika? Do you remember the name he put on
Show me the
that?
money.
Show me the money. So why don't you comment on that?
Well, basically, because, we always hear it and we've talked about this as well, where it's like, parents and kids are like, this is an investment. We're going to go all in. We're going to do what we have to do. We're going to pray about it. If we don't have the, the funding that we know we should have gotten, but there's a reality that slaps you in the face when you get there, when the bills get to rolling in. So really, making sure the financial match, that's critical in all of this.
Yeah. And one thing he also said that was interesting was he said the month when he gets the most calls about students wanting to transfer is January. And the reason why I think that's kind of interesting is, this goes actually back to when I was in boarding school in Pennsylvania at Westtown. Brennan was there. He left in 2004 to go off to Dairyfield. We did a few other things, but he's currently in New Hampshire now as a director of college counseling at a private school there. But I think it was around 2006. I started noticing, and we started having conversations with the faculty, that kids had more depression in the winter months. And I really think it had to do with the weather. Seriously. No, seriously. There's something about the sun coming out and that just kind of lifts your spirit. So I don't know that. I haven't done any scientific research or anything, but I think there's some correlation with like cold weather, gloomy days, and people's spirits. But it was just interesting that he commented on how many people, wanted to leave in January. I personally like the idea of if you can, I really like the idea of giving it at least a second year. Because I've seen so many students that wanted to leave in their first year and stuck it out, and then they get their peer group. Once you get your peer group and your friends, you're usually good. Right.
So, Mark, let me ask you this. So how do you, as a parent, we've gone through Jalen, about to work with Janaea. What do you think of the top, let's just say top 2 ways, not even top 3 ways. What are the top 2 ways that we minimize that for the kid? Is it the visitation? The visits, you get a sense, you get a culture, but you don't really get an in-depth. Everything's not going to be the exact same, once you actually get there and dive into it. Is it the visits? Is it the research, the online research? What do you think is the most, what would be our most important steps to take that could minimize some of that initial one to, I got to get out of here, kind of mentality?
That's a deep question. So certainly these things we've talked about, first of all, going through as a checklist so that you don't have unrealistic expectations, so that you do go to a school that's affordable, because a lot of people do leave over money. So that's one thing. This is a nice little checklist for you, but I don't mean to give a tease, Anika, but in chapter 16 or episode 16, we're gonna look at 32 different, well, we can't talk about them all, but all the different ways in which you determine whether or not an environment is right for your child. So that's very important that you go through a thorough analysis of what each child's looking for, and that you actually pick an institution that lines up with what you're looking for.
Great tease, Mark. So great tease.
Yeah, I know. That's a tease. That's a few weeks away, but I had to drop that in there. Then the other things you said are important. So it is important to spend time on campus. If schools offer overnights, to do it. If schools offer opportunities to sit in classes, to do it. And it's important to talk to as many students as you possibly can about their experience. not the people the admission office gives you, so that you're hearing the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of it. And then, and then you do want to do internet research too, because, things as simple as whether or not they're going to offer the majors and the programs that you're potentially interested in, and not to mention all kinds of other things you can do with internet research. So it's really all of it, Anika. I know you try to narrow me down to two, but I really want to go for a comprehensive analysis there on that one. So he says, my advice is to invest. Instead of fixating on aspects of one's college that are disappointing, make a concerted effort to identify the positive. Seize opportunities to become involved. Engage peers and seek out professors. Enroll in courses that are genuinely interesting and not just fulfilling requirements. Try something new and be present. Give it time, months, not weeks. Grow into it rather than merely react to it. Finally, manage expectations and embrace the experience.
Awesome. Excellent work, Mr. Brennan Bernard.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
All right. We are in our third chapter or episode. And the reason I say chapter episode is because every one of our episodes lines up with the book 171 Answers. And I strongly encourage you to go to 171answers.com. Strongly recommend that you buy the book. You'll get a lot more out of the podcast if you read each chapter before the episode. But even if you don't choose to buy the book, if you go to a section on 171answers.com that says see exactly what 171 Answers covers, you'll know exactly what we're going to be talking about in each week. So this week, we're in our third episode talking about how to build a college list. And we're going to have 18 episodes on this particular section. And this particular episode talks about what's a lottery school, a reach school, a mid-range, a likely, and a safety. Now, we touched on that very briefly last week, but we're going to do a deeper dive and get a lot more in depth into it today. But but for those of you who didn't listen to last week, do you want to do a little bit of a recap, Anika, according to your recollection of what's the difference between?
So let me give you my 2-second answers on each one, right?
Okay.
So a lottery school is a school that is just like winning the lottery. You got a 1 in a million chance of getting into it, right? You got the reach schools where you're qualified to get in there, but the chances are slim, I would say, that you're going to get accepted. The mid-range schools, I'm going to say that is the one where you are qualified and you are highly likely to get in, but there's still a chance that you won't. Or did I mix that up with the likely schools?
Yeah, you mixed it up with the likely, but that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, I'll let you straighten me out.
Yeah.
And then
I'm going to do that whether you let me or not.
Exactly. And then finally, we got the safety schools where it's a slam dunk. It's more of a numerical equate. You meet the numbers, you're in there, and you're good to go.
Good.
How did I do?
I'd say 3 out of 5. So
Okay.
Lottery, absolutely. You got that one right. Lottery, another term sometimes for lottery, some counselors will use is a far reach. And so here's how I want you to think about it. Like, I'm with shoes on, I'm about 6'1", and my arm reach is almost 8 feet. So if I'm trying to reach up to something that's 10 feet, I can't get it. I can't reach it. If I'm trying to get some sugar out of the cupboard or something, it's at 10 feet. So in other words, it's really out of your range. It's a school that's out of your range. And so, Anika, how many lottery schools do we recommend that you apply to?
I'm gonna say 1 because
lottery are out of your range. 0. 0.
Okay.
Zero lotteries.
Because I was good. I'm so glad you said that, Mark. I'm so serious because I was going to ask, why in the world do I need this on my list?
Yeah. So you're right. So lotteries don't go on your list, but it's a way of you being able to look at a school and put it in a category. No, okay, that's a lottery. I'm not at that level. So no for lottery. And then,
thank you for that clarification.
Hey, I'll keep you on your toes. And then next is reach schools, sometimes referred to as stretch schools, sometimes referred to as dream schools. So that would be like me reaching and it's right around that range, right? Like my tiptoes, I can get there. So it's not out of range, but it is a school for whom the academic profile of the average student is slightly above where you are. So the chances are less than 50% that you're going to get in. And it's also a school, by the way, that is so ridiculously selective that I don't care how strong your profile is, certain schools you won't get in. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine in Memphis. And she was talking about how she was really surprised her kid didn't get into Duke because they got into Princeton and all these other schools. That just doesn't, and then she was saying to me that the academic profile is above the average kid that Duke takes. And I had to tell her, I had to say, Duke is a reach school for anybody. It's that selective. It doesn't matter. They're taking 9% of applicants, 7% in the regular admission process. Okay. Right. And so a reach is a school that should be on your list if you like it, but you have to realistically accept the fact that you have a less than 50% chance of getting in.
Okay, wait, is that the only reason that you have it on there because it's one that you really like? Like you have some affinity toward it because of X reason?
Yeah. So if you don't mind me bumping that to about 5 minutes from now, because I wanted to get into why each of these should be on your list too.
Sure. Good. Yeah, rock and roll.
There you go. And so mid-range, you kind of nailed that. That's what I call them coin toss schools or 50-50 schools, because think about flipping a coin, right? 50-50. Like it's a school that if you had to bet whether or not you'd get in, there's just as good a chance as you'd get in as you wouldn't get in. So it's just really hard to say. But of course, you like it or you wouldn't be applying. Sometimes called target schools, sometimes called match schools. And you got that one right. And then likely you got a likely. Oh, no, that's the one you didn't get right. Likely you got right. Likely is like the word says, like you are likely to be admitted. Sometimes they're referred to as probable schools. So your chances are, 80 to 90% that you'll get in, but it's not an absolute slam dunk. Okay. And then a safety is a slam dunk. So, and so that's kind of, a little bit of an overview.
I like to call the safety schools the self-esteem boosters. That's a good point, because those kids go through it, man. When they're in that process, they're like, "Oh God, just let me get in a school, please." So
something you brought up a really good point with that, Anika, because I like people to get into a school early in the process in the fall, because it does relieve stress and take pressure off them and increase confidence. And I also like to see kids get in, at least half or close to half of the schools they apply to, because that also builds confidence as well. Okay. But last week, Anika, you asked a question, and I don't know if you noticed this, but I kind of paused afterward. So you kind of asked me a question that I've been thinking about it ever since. So you asked me the question, you said, how can a student find out if a school is a lottery, a reach, a mid-range, a likely, or a safety? Do you remember asking that?
I do.
Did you notice that I paused before I answered?
I did.
Yeah, and I paused for a couple of reasons. And then we went on and we gave several sources. College Data was like your favorite of the one on the list. I mentioned the Common Data Set is my favorite, but not every school has that. And Big Future is my second favorite, and then College Data would be my third. But this is what I want to mention, and this is why I paused. And throughout this podcast, Anika, I've taken the perspective of I'm not holding back anything. Like I don't have a mindset of I'm going to give people knowledge up into like the 80% level. And if you really want the real stuff, then become my client. Like I haven't taken that approach. Like I'm sharing everything.
Right.
But the reason why this was really uncomfortable with me is because I really truly believe that a little knowledge is dangerous. So, one of my former clients, the parent, he's become very, very active at representing his child's school as a parent, current parent. And so they've actually given him some training. He does a lot of fairs.
Oh, wow.
For them. And he was talking to me, he's like, Mark, I have a little bit of knowledge, but it's dangerous because I have a little bit of knowledge. And it's true. And this is why, because my concern is that people will think with us giving them the sources that they can actually properly assign where schools are on their list. And I will say that if it is a school that does admissions by the numbers, you guys can go back and look at the podcast where we talked about that. That was actually episode 11. We talked about admissions by the numbers versus holistic. If it's admissions by the numbers, then yeah, you can use these tools and you can get a pretty good sense, a very good sense, I'll even say, of how to categorize them. But if it's a school that does holistic admissions, it really requires a professional. Like it doesn't have to be me. You can take someone else who you know and you're comfortable with, but you really need somebody who really knows the material to guide you through this process. And my question for you is, why do you feel I say this? Why do you feel I believe that the websites that give projected chances of admission are not adequate for schools that do holistic admissions?
Well, I would pose that question back to you because I would say, is there, no, seriously, like we're relying on the data that's presented on the site. Like it's got to be, we got to consider the validity. It's, to some extent, that is the purpose of it being up. So why wouldn't we be able to rely on what's up there?
Great question. So I'm going to tell you 10 reasons very quickly, and there's more, but I just jotted down 10 reasons in like 35 seconds. So one of them is people's essays are all over the place, and none of those websites can tell how strong your essays are, whether they're weak essays or amazing essays. Second reason, none of them know what your teacher recommendations are like. Third reason, nobody knows what your counselor recommendation is like. Fourthly, they're not taking into consideration the school you're coming from, what the reputation of the school is, what specific relationships that school has with other schools. Fifth reason, they can't look at what your discipline record is. Sixth reason, they can't look at your grade trajectory. Are your grades on an upward incline or on a decline? Okay, these are all big factors. Seventh reason, they can't look at whether you are an extracurricular or cultural match for the school. So let's say, for example, all of students' activities indicate this student has been passionate about sports and loves sports and has played sports at a high level throughout high school. Okay. And let's say he's applying to Reed. Well, Reed doesn't even have varsity sports. So a school can look at an applicant like that and say, you know what? I don't think this person is going to be happy here. Or a school can also assess if this is the kind of kid that would do much better at a big school and we're a small school. All these things are things that the data can't read. Another thing, demonstrated interest. Do you have a good demonstrated interest strategy? Okay, that's not in the data. Ninth thing, hooks, tags, institutional priorities. These are factors that have a huge bearing on where you get in and where you don't get in. So real quick story for you, Anika. One of my clients I'm working with right now goes to the lab school in Chicago. And he was telling me about how, wow, the University of Chicago accepted 18 kids from our school last year. Okay. Now, I happen to know that the lab school is almost a high percentage of kids at the lab school are kids from kids whose parents are faculty members at the University of Chicago. So I said to him, how many of those kids, those 18, have parents that are professors at the University of Chicago? He's like, oh my goodness, I didn't think about that. And the reason why I say that is a huge hook. I mean, I have seen kids who are not that strong get in highly selective schools because their parents were on the faculty. Wow. And there's all kinds of we're going to get into hooks or institutional priorities in another episode. And then the last thing is for schools that have interviews, is this kid a good interviewer? How did you interview? So those are just like 10 subjective factors, all of that play a major role in who gets in and who doesn't get in. And none of those websites can take any of those things into consideration.
Got it.
So does that make sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense now.
Remember, the websites are basically looking at test scores and grades.
Right.
Okay. That's all. I mean, some of them are factoring a few other things in, like curriculum.
Okay.
And occasionally they're factoring some hooks in, but most of the time they can't tell all those things. I mentioned those are all subjective.
Yeah.
So those things are great for admissions by the numbers, and they can give you a general idea for holistic admissions of just the average applicant. But in order to really feel more confident, I really recommend that people have a professional build their list. Because what happens is people undermatch all the time by using those websites. Right. They think I don't have the test scores to get in, and yes, you do. You're a super strong competitive, a super strong applicant. Couple more questions, Anika.
Okay.
Why is it good to have schools at different levels of selectivity? Like, what's the reason for it?
I think it would be because, again, I keep going back to financial reasons, and that some of the schools just may have more money than others. And you may be able to, again, compare your packages based on, you can just compare your packages. How about that? I
mean, that's definitely one of the main reasons. And it can happen on both. It can happen on both ends. So, which is weird. So what happened is a lot of times with the reach schools, the reach schools, they do have a lot of prestige. They have a lot of name recognition. A lot of times they have a lot of funding that they built up over time. And sometimes they do have the largest, especially need-based packages of the schools out there. And also, if you go to your likelies or your safeties, a lot of times they have great packages because you're one of the stronger applicants in their applicant pool. So you're more likely to qualify for merit money. So that's definitely one of the reasons. It's also another reason is just to ensure that you don't get shut out.
Right.
Okay. That you definitely are going to get in a cadre of your schools. And you don't, I mean, I got a terrible, terrible call this week from a student, Anika, that's number 2 in their class in a big school. Huge school. It's over 600 kids in the graduating class. They're ranked number 2 because the school does rankings. And can you believe that this student didn't get in anywhere?
What? No, nowhere. I can't believe that.
Yeah, because they thought they applied to the hardest schools in the country to get into, and that was their entire list. So they basically built their whole list off of reaches.
Okay, I can't believe it then.
Yeah, but they didn't have any guidance. So it also ensures you're going to get in a good cadre of your schools. It helps with the financial aid packages, and it should ensure a decent amount of success, which is also good for your confidence level. And each of the different ranges of schools, Anika, they all have different benefits. Last question in this section. Besides financial benefits, can you think of any advantages to the other tiers of schools? Like, for example, advantages to any one of you could pick, like advantage to a reach. What would be advantage to a reach?
I don't know, Mark. I think I want to say it's the variety of the types of schools that they are, but I'm not too sure about that one.
Well, I think there's specific benefits to each category. Like, for example, one of the things about reaches is because you're around very highly accomplished peers, you have kids that can push you. Okay. To bring out, if you believe a rising tide lifts all boats, and those kids are more likely to go on and to do well because they've proven they can put the whole thing together in high school. So you can have a really strong network. Professionally, when you get out with your reach. But on the other hand, there can be a disadvantage to a reach too, because sometimes reaches can be debilitating to people's confidence, because you can feel like everybody's smarter than me here. Or if you're trying to go to med school, if kids are coming in with higher profiles than you, it can be really hard to get the great GPA that you need to get into med school, because you basically put yourself around a bunch of peers that are more advanced than you're already at. Okay. So each one kind of has advantages and disadvantages. Like likelies can be good on a confidence level. They can be good for getting high GPAs. They can be good for getting large aid awards, but then maybe your peers are not as motivated around you. And also they may not push you as much. And so some of it depends on the kid. A lot of it depends on the kid too, right? Knowing are you the kind of person, okay, you've always been one of the top kids in your school. Is it going to be crushing to you if you go into an environment where you're maybe in the bottom third? Like, a lot of kids can't handle that. And you kind of have to know if you can handle that or not.
Got it.
So there's different advantages to each of them. And that's why you kind of have a range. But one mistake people make is they think that the reach is better than a mid-range, and the mid-range is better than a likely. And that's a huge mistake. And another mistake people make, and we're really going to get into this next week, is they don't vet all of these schools to make sure that all of them are affordable. Time for a question from our listeners.
Okay, yay. We're at our question of the week. We love our questions. And Mark, this week it is coming from another college counselor, from a Miss Holly in Atlanta. And I'll just point out that this person heard you speak before, Mark, and they want to know why you don't feel quite enthusiastic about the Parent Plus loans, and what are your true thoughts around that?
All right, so that would be a correct extrapolation. In general, I'm very bearish on the Plus loans. Now, I never say never, so I want to kind of start out with some positives. Plus loan is an acronym. Plus originally for parent loan for undergraduate students, but then they started including plus loan for graduate students too. So now you'll hear them more commonly referred to as a Parent Plus loan, which is basically just a euphemism for plus. And it's a loan that is issued by the Department of Education. It does require the completion of the FAFSA, and it's a parent loan for the parent, so it's not for the student. We talked about student borrowing. What was that, Anika, a couple episodes ago when we said how much students borrow? Yep. So this falls under the rubric of parent borrowing. And so there are some positives about the Parent Plus loan. It has a lot more flexible repayment options, certainly than private loans does. There's even a way you can actually take a Parent Plus loan, convert it into a different type of loan that has some loan forgiveness potential. And that would never happen with a private loan.
Wow, okay.
It's kind of tricky, and we'll talk about that that would be a whole episode, but there's some ways that can be done. So there's some flexibility with it, which is nice. So those are a couple things. And this is something else which can lead to the Parent Plus coming into play. So the way, I'm going to ask you this, Anika, from the standpoint of the college as well as the federal government, who does the federal government and the college see as responsible for paying for college? The parents or the students?
The students.
Well, that was a trick question because the answer is both. It's both.
Well,
all right?
And let me tell you, can I tell you why I said that? Because I remember the FAFSA being, I remember you saying that specifically, that the FAFSA is in the kid's name. So it is the kid's responsibility to pay that money back.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that, because that's what even then it's not right. but I'm glad you said that, because I think that's what most people would think. And so it's tricky, right? So the FAFSA is in the student's name. Absolutely correct. That FAFSA, by the way, is an acronym. We're getting a lot of acronyms today. A plus FAFSA, free application for federal student aid. Okay. And it's in the student's name, but when you complete the FAFSA, it generates something known as an EFC, which is another acronym. Any idea what that stands for, Anika?
Expected family contribution.
Oh, yeah. You go, girl. Most people don't know that. It's tough. Exactly. So it calculates this expected family contribution.
Oh, family, right? Keyword.
Yeah. And this family contribution is a dollar amount that both the school and the government believe you should be able to pay. Okay. It's what determines how much need-based aid that you're eligible for. Now, most people don't believe they can pay that when they see that number. They have cardiac arrest, and that's a whole other conversation. But that is used for that. Now, here's the thing, Anika. What do you think are the single biggest factors that determine what your expected family contribution will be? There's one by far that's the biggest. There's a few that are really, really, really significant in determining your EFC.
I'm going to say the parents' income.
Absolutely. So see how we're back to parents now?
Yeah, you're right. Ooh, light bulbs.
Because that's the biggest one by far, by the way. The parent income.
You're right. Darn.
Any others that you can think of that influence what that number would be?
I guess the size of the family too.
That is one of the ones, but believe it or not, it's not what I would call a major one. There's major and minor ones. And we have a whole episode on that. But let me just say, so the income of the parents is huge. The number of kids in college is huge. And also whether or not a student is a dependent or an independent student. Okay, those ones have like massive bearing on that number. But the biggest thing, most common by far, is the parent income. If you're a parent that has massive assets, and we'll get into what assets count and which ones don't in a different episode, assets can play a role, but rarely do student income or student assets, which also influence things, by the way, rarely do they move that number a lot. So that number is mostly based on parent income. Not everybody, this may be the most controversial thing that I'm going to say so far in our 13 episodes, but this is something that I do believe is getting up there into the teens. So that EFC number, because it is mostly based off parent income and assets, it is a number that I believe the parents have a responsibility for in the process. Okay. And so because it's seen as a joint responsibility, like students going to get student loans, a student's going to be expected to work. So they have to come up with that portion. Okay. Obviously all this changes if you get full scholarships, and this, like we'll get into that later. But so parents are expected to come up with that EFC, and a lot of people can't. And when you can't, then what do? Well, one option is you either pick up a second job or you work more hours or overtime, right? That's one option, but there's some people for whom that's not possible. And if you have a lot of this depends on your lifestyle, right? So if you live pretty frugally, then you generally will look at your EFC and it may seem manageable to you. But almost everybody adjusts their lifestyle to their income.
Right.
They just do.
Right.
So most people, so there may be a place where the Parent Plus loan is your best option for a parent to fulfill their EFC. And I believe that is something that a parent really should do. That's being fair to your child, is to commit to that portion. And I believe the student should be willing to do the federal direct loan. That's assuming that you don't get, crazy scholarships, which a lot of kids do, but not everybody does.
Right.
So that would be, so those are all the positives. So before I go in on it, I have to say some things sometimes when it may make some sense.
Okay.
All right. Because trust me, I'd much rather be talking about paying for college strictly by grants and scholarships. But there are at least 4 reasons why kids don't get all the grants and scholarships that they need. Some people start too late in the process. Sometimes kids aren't willing to do the work to do the scholarship application. Some kids are just poor candidates for especially generous scholarships. And then sometimes, like a student I'm working with right now, they're interested in Princeton. Princeton doesn't give away any merit-based scholarships. It's only need-based. So there's times when you won't be eligible for additional money. So in that case, people turn to additional resources. And one of the big ones they're going to turn to is this Parent Plus loan. So I had to say that those are all the positives before I go in on it, Anika.
Oh, wow.
So before I do go in on it, any thoughts on why I don't like it?
Well, it's a loan. we don't. What is it? The 4-letter word that we don't like.
Yeah, but you may remember I'm pretty positive about the federal direct student loan.
Yeah,
I like that one.
That's true. I don't know. Go ahead and give it to us. Hit us.
I'll give you a couple minor reasons and then a couple major ones. So one, it is at 7%, which is still, it's on the high side. That's the rate right now.
Okay.
It's a little. So for example, the federal direct's at 4.4. That's a big difference, over time. You run the numbers. Then there's a loan origination fee, which I don't like loan origination fees, but I really don't like them when they're almost 4.3%. And that's what the Parent Plus loan origination fee is. And you cannot get around that. So that adds to your costs. All right. But the main reason why I do not like this loan is because of how irresponsible both the federal government and schools are at disseminating this loan. And so, Anika, do you remember when you bought your house? Or I could even say, you've had a car note before, right? At some point?
Yeah.
I get a sense that means more than once. Anyway.
More than, yeah.
All right. So let's say your car note or your mortgage. Walk me through the process. What did you have to do to get that?
Fill out an application and submit your credit, and it comes back and tells you what your rate is, and voila, there it is. Yes.
Now, one of the things that's important in that process is if you're, and I could say the same thing about a personal loan, but let's just now focus on either car loan or mortgage. Okay. Part of that credit evaluation is looking at whether or not you have enough discretionary money to afford the house or the car you're trying to get.
Right.
Do you remember how you had to submit pay stubs or W-2 or some of that kind of stuff?
I'm sure I did.
Yeah, you did. So because they want to look to say, okay, you're not going to buy this $500,000 house when you make 10 grand. Like, no, it's not happening. Right. So they want to make sure they have all these numbers, these ratios that they've looked at so they can tell that, no, you actually can afford to do this. And that's part of the evaluation. All right. And the craziest thing in the world is that is not part of the evaluation for the Plus loan. It makes no sense. It's ridiculous. I had 2 conversations in the last week, Anika. One was with a different lender, and another was with another college counselor. And we were both talking about the Parent Plus loan, and we were saying that what happens with this Parent Plus loan is that it would be considered predatory lending if a bank did what they do. Because there's, so here's what happens. Is there a credit evaluation in the process? I mean, is there an application process? Yes. Okay. There is. Once again, it's a parent loan in the parent's name. So the parent's doing the application. But what they look for is what is known as adverse credit. Sometimes people call it derogatory credit. Right. That's what they look for. So any idea what would constitute adverse or derogatory credit? What do you think?
Anything that's defaulted, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, but isn't that the norm? Like, how's that?
So here's for example, bankruptcy. Yes, you won't get the plus loan. Repossession, because these are all defaults, right? Repossession, you won't get it. Foreclosure, no, not getting it. Tax lien on the property, no, not getting it. Wage garnishment, no. Okay. Or if you have had, it's a little bit more than $2,000 on a revolving credit card that's like 90-day late. Those 6 things will knock you out of qualifying for a plus.
Okay.
But what I didn't say was you're applying and you don't have enough money when we look at your income to see if you can pay it back. That is not part of the evaluation at all.
Oh, wow.
That's a big problem.
They're just throwing you into the deep end. I gotcha.
Yes, they're throwing you in the deep end. So there are a lot of people that may not have like one of those catastrophes, but they might make like $16,000 and they can turn around and get $30,000 a year in a Parent Plus.
Oh my goodness.
And it happens. That's tough. It's a real problem, and it's a big problem. So they only check for adverse credit history. They don't check whether or not your income warrants that you can take the loan out. That's the first problem. Second problem is how schools actually disseminate this loan to you. So what happens is when a student applies for financial aid, they get an aid award, right? And then they'll show you how you can pay for it. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing they'll do is they'll take away any grants or scholarships that you're getting, off of how you'll pay for it. That'll be listed on the aid award. If you get work study, that'll be on there. Not everybody does, but if you do. And then there'll almost always be the federal direct loans, either all unsubsidized or for freshmen, $3,500 of subsidized or $2,000 of unsubsidized. So that'll be in there. Okay. And then the rest, they will show you as a plus loan. And because a lot of schools don't have the money to give large grants and scholarships, then you can get a crazy plus loan in your aid award. So let's get case in point. Let's say I had 2 students in the last 10 days that were interested in the University of Alabama. Okay. If you apply to the University of Alabama as an out-of-state student and you don't have a 3.5 or 27 on the ACT or 12.80 on the SAT, because they're an admission by the numbers school. Okay. Mandatory minimum admissions by the numbers. So guess how much you are going to get in your scholarship money. Guess how much scholarship money you're going to get if you don't have a 27 on an ACT, 1280 SAT, or 3.5, and you're an out-of-state student. Take a guess.
I'm going to go with 0.
0.
I had a gut feeling.
0. Okay, now it's a little different. If you're in state, it could be 25. But so let's say you're out of state, right? Now, if you apply, let's say you make $20,000. Your parents make $20,000. Okay, and out of state is around 45. So think about it, Nika. You're going to apply. They're going to give you $5,500 subsidized loan, no grants, no scholarships, and then you're going to get this huge plus loan in your package. And you don't look at any. You make $20,000. How can you afford a $40,000 plus loan? You can't.
You cannot.
But that's what schools do. And then it gets even worse. Sometimes, not all, but sometimes it's not clear whether it's a loan. They sometimes still use the letter L or LN, and people don't even know what it is. And then there's this pressure that, I got to let little Johnny go to his top school, which I hate that, but I work against that every day from parents, right? People feel like, this is his dream school. He's wanted to go. He's been such a good kid. I need to let him go, blah, blah, blah. And so all that's in your package. Now, here's one more thing I don't like. If you get the federal direct student loan, which has caps in place to prevent people from being irresponsible, it requires you go through loan counseling. Okay? Do you know that the Parent Plus loan has no requirement to have loan counseling? None. So people end up biting off way, way, way more than they can chew. And it really, really, really has a deleterious impact on their retirement savings. And it really hits low income families hard. One study found that 38% of families in the lowest decile of earnings are giving up 38% of all their income to these Parent Plus loans. So what I don't like about it is it leads people to make extremely irresponsible lending decisions. And I mean, there's more, but we'll get into that in another podcast.
Yeah, I see your blood pressure rising, Mark.
Yeah. Well, last thing of all those things I said in there, was there one that jumped off the page for you in terms of why I really don't like it?
I mean, that whole, I don't care if you make $2, here's the loan. Like, that's not right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just straight up wrong.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Scandalous.
Well, and the last thing that I'll say, there's no you know why? I'm convinced of this, Anika. I'm convinced that, I don't know this for sure, but I'm convinced one of the reasons why this is the case. Some people believe the federal government is making money off people, for one, but the colleges want it this way because they're relying on you taking out loans that you can't sustain in order to pay their bills. And and I'll tell you one of the reasons why I feel this way. So one thing that Obama did when he was in power, he made it a little bit better. So that whole thing that I talked about adverse credit history, bankruptcies, repossessions, foreclosures. Mm-hmm. The way it used to be is as long as you had none of that stuff on your record in the last 90 days, then you could pass. Okay. But because it was leading to such irresponsible lending, he made it, you can't have it on your track record for the last 5 years. Okay. And what that led to is lots more people not qualifying. Okay. There was tremendous pushback from the colleges when they made the credit evaluation 5 years more than 90 days, that you couldn't have any adverse credit history, and tremendous pushback, lobbying, HBCUs in particular. They're like, we're going to close down because of this. Because they are relying on people taking out debt that they can't sustain in order to pay their bills at the college. So when that rug was pulled from under them, I had a director of financial aid tell me that after that change, more than half the families at their school were not qualifying anymore for PLUS loans. It's definitely better than it used to be because it's catching people that shouldn't have been in it, right? But it's nowhere near where it needs to be.
Man, scandalous, Mark. The most scandalous.
Anika, why don't you tell us what we can expect next week?
Yes, Mark, next week it's going to be great. Once again, our article is going to talk about a really extremely interesting trend in colleges that accept students in their spring instead of the traditional fall semesters. And we are going to be in chapter 14, and we're going to be talking about the importance of having financial match schools on your kids list. And then our question is going to come from a mom that she's got some concerns about the FAFSA application. So stay tuned, y'all.
Tune in and see you next week.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send it to someone you know who could really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. Marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And Your College Bound Kid is produced by Esteban Sartho. If you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you would like to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text at area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on each show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.